I settled into my seat on the flight, ready for what I expected to be a peaceful ride. It had been a long week, and the quiet hum of the plane's engines was a welcomed comfort. I glanced around at the other passengers, many with their heads buried in books or staring blankly at the screens in front of them. My mind wandered for a moment, then I felt it, a cold stare. I turned my head to see a man in the seat next to me. He was in his late 40s, maybe early 50s, dressed in a crisp shirt and tie. He was glaring at me with an intensity that was hard to ignore. I had seen this look before, but it still caught me off guard every time. "Excuse me," I said, trying to break the tension. "Is there something wrong?" He paused, and for a moment, I thought he might respond with an apology or something that could at least make sense of the situation. Instead, he scoffed and gave a dismissive wave. "I just don't get it," he muttered under his breath. "A soldier on a flight like this? Shouldn't you be somewhere else, doing something more useful?" I felt my stomach tighten. I knew what he was getting at, but I stayed calm. His words were loaded with judgment, the kind that can sting in a way that's hard to explain. "You don't know me, sir," I said, keeping my voice even. "But I'm just trying to get home like everyone else." The man leaned back, still shaking his head, clearly unimpressed. His eyes flicked back to his phone, clearly wanting to end the conversation. But I couldn't let it slide, not this time. His attitude, so openly dismissive, felt like an attack on everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made. I decided to ignore him after that, but the weight of the encounter stayed with me throughout the flight. It was as though something was bubbling under the surface, waiting for a moment to explode. And little did I know, the explosion was waiting just outside the plane. The next day would reveal the full scope of what had happened during that flight. I didn't think much of the incident when I left the airport. The tension had simmered down during the flight, and I told myself that maybe it was just one of those moments where people let their frustrations spill out. But when I checked my phone later that evening, I was hit with a wave of disbelief. I scrolled through my feed, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. But then, a headline stopped me cold: "Passenger mocks soldier mid-flight." Next day's shocking turn. I felt my heart drop into my stomach as I clicked the link. It wasn't just some random news outlet, it was one of the most followed platforms online, and the story had gone viral. The article described in vivid detail how a man had mocked a soldier sitting next to him on a flight, calling him out for being out of place. But the worst part came next. There, in black and white, was the statement that shook me. The flight attendant had overheard the entire exchange and had responded by telling the man to settle down, but not before the tension had escalated. The implication was that I had somehow been the one at fault for provoking the situation. Worse still, the article mentioned that multiple passengers had witnessed the scene and described me as unruly in the way I had responded to a casual remark. I felt sick. I knew it wasn't true. I hadn't raised my voice or been disrespectful. But the story painted me as the problem, and the focus on my military background added a layer of shame that made it worse. How could they twist it like that? I scrolled down further, hoping for some kind of redemption, but there was none. The comment section was flooded with people calling me everything from entitled to a troublemaker, and some even suggested that I shouldn't be allowed to fly at all. My face went pale as I read them. People had formed an opinion about me based on a moment that had been entirely out of my control. They didn't know the full story, and yet there I was, public enemy number one. I closed my phone, feeling a knot form in my throat. How could this happen? How had something so insignificant become this overwhelming, this personal? I felt exposed, like a story had been written for me that I didn't get to tell. The next day, I knew I had to do something about it. I couldn't just let this lie sit out there. But what could I do? I spent the next few hours wrestling with myself. I wanted to just let it go, pretend like it hadn't happened, but I couldn't. The sting of being misrepresented was too much, and the thought of people believing lies about me was unbearable. I knew I had to respond in some way, but how? The first step was to find out who was behind the article. After a bit of digging, I discovered the reporter's name and her contact information. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of what I was about to do sinking in. Was I ready to confront this? Could it make things worse? In the end, I dialed the number. "Hello, this is Erica Simmons from the Daily News. How may I help you?" The voice on the other end was professional, almost robotic, but there was an edge to it, like she already knew why I was calling. "I'm the soldier you wrote about in your article," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "And I think there are some things you got wrong." There was a pause. I could almost hear her mentally preparing for a confrontation. "I'm listening," she said, her tone softening just a bit. I took a deep breath, careful with my words. "First of all, I did not provoke that man. The article suggests that I was the one causing trouble, but that's simply not true. I've served in the military for years, and I know how to handle myself. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't make a scene. He was the one who started the confrontation, and I was just trying to get through the flight." "I see," she replied, sounding like she was actually listening now. "But we did have multiple sources who described the situation differently. Did you speak to me?" I asked, the frustration in my voice growing despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Did you give me a chance to tell my side of the story?" There was a silence, and then a reluctant admission. "No, we didn't. We were working with what we had at the time." "Well," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my tone, "you missed a pretty important piece of the picture." I could tell she was considering this, and for a moment, the conversation seemed to hang in the air. Then she spoke again, sounding less defensive. "What do you want me to do about it?" "I want a correction," I said firmly. "I want the story to reflect what really happened. I want people to know the truth. I can't guarantee a full retraction, but I'll certainly look into it," she said. "Let me speak with my editor. If there's a mistake, we'll do what we can to fix it." I hung up, not entirely satisfied, but feeling like I had at least taken the first step. I wasn't going to let this lie linger without giving my side of the story. But as I sat there, waiting for something to change, I couldn't help but wonder how many others had been through the same thing, misunderstood, misrepresented, and left to deal with the fallout alone. It was one thing to fight in a war, but this felt like an entirely different kind of battle. The next day, the headlines would shift again, this time, in a way I couldn't have predicted. The next morning, I woke up to an unexpected email notification. It was from Erica Simmons, the reporter I had spoken to the night before. I opened it cautiously, not knowing what to expect. The subject line read, "Regarding your flight incident." I clicked it open. "Dear, my name, I wanted to follow up with you after our conversation. After reviewing the facts, we have decided to amend the original article with the details you provided. We appreciate you reaching out, and I sincerely apologize for the oversight. The revised piece will be published shortly. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Best regards, Erica Simmons, The Daily News." I blinked, rereading the email twice. Was this a real apology? A correction? I wasn't sure what to make of it at first. I had expected something more along the lines of a generic, "We're sorry if you were offended," but this was different. I quickly navigated to the website to check if the correction had been posted yet. It was still early, but I could see the revised headline already waiting to go live: "Passenger mocks soldier on flight. What really happened will surprise you." I clicked on it, my heart pounding a little faster now. The article had been updated. It was clear, direct, and included a statement from me. There was no sugarcoating, no twisting the facts. It was as if they had finally seen the truth for what it was. For the first time in days, I felt a bit of relief wash over me. The weight that had been sitting on my chest lifted slightly. It wasn't a perfect solution, nothing would completely erase the damage the first version of the story had done, but it was a start. A step toward reclaiming my dignity. But what I wasn't prepared for was the firestorm of attention that came with it. Within hours, the story was everywhere. The comments section under the new article was filled with mixed reactions. Some people stood by the original narrative, still calling me out for stirring up drama, while others were quick to defend me, pointing out that the first version had been grossly misleading. The debate raged on, growing larger with every passing hour. And then it happened. One of the passengers from that flight, someone who had witnessed the entire interaction, came forward with their own statement. "I was there. I saw what happened. He didn't cause any trouble. The guy next to him was the one who started everything. I had to say something because I couldn't just watch them paint him as the villain," she wrote on her social media. "That soldier didn't deserve what happened to him." Her post went viral within minutes. More people began sharing their stories of witnessing the same thing, confirming the truth of what I had said all along. It was like a chain reaction, and suddenly, I wasn't alone in this. The voices of those who had silently observed the injustice were now being heard. But with every wave of support came another wave of criticism, just as loud, just as forceful. Some people believed the truth was being manipulated, that the entire situation was being used to score political points. The more I saw the arguments escalating, the more I began to question whether I would ever truly find peace in this whole mess. Still, one thing was undeniable: the story had changed. It wasn't just about a single flight anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the consequences. And that was something I could live with. The news cycle moved quickly, as it always did, but the effect of the story didn't fade as I had expected. The corrections, the witness statements, and the wave of online support all continued to grow in strength. The conversation shifted, not just about me but about how we treat each other in everyday moments, how easily things can spiral out of control, especially when we assume we know the full story. I thought I could finally breathe easy, but the reality was more complicated. People, strangers, former colleagues, even family members, started reaching out. Some were genuinely supportive, sharing messages of encouragement. Others, however, were much less kind. It became clear that the story had dug into deeper issues for many, issues far beyond a single flight. It wasn't just about me anymore. The incident sparked discussions about racial perceptions, military service, and assumptions we make about others based on appearances. It was as though my moment had ignited a spark, and now people were debating everything from social behavior in public spaces to how certain groups are viewed in society. One particular message stood out, an unexpected one that I wasn't sure how to process. It came from a man I hadn't spoken to in years, someone I had served with during a deployment. We hadn't kept in touch after our tours ended, but the message was clear: "Man, I've been following this whole thing, and I gotta tell you. I'm proud of you. You didn't just let that slide. You stood up. We need more people like you who aren't afraid to speak up when things get twisted." That man on the plane. He's a reminder that some people will always see you for something you're not. But you can't let them win. I sat with that message for a while, letting the words sink in. It wasn't just about fighting for what's right in that moment, it was about the larger fight. The fight to make sure that when something is wrong, you call it out. That you refuse to let silence be mistaken for consent. And that you never let anyone define who you are based on a moment in time, on a story twisted by others. But there was another side to all of this that I hadn't expected. As the headlines continued to shift, the pressures began to mount. I was becoming the face of something much bigger than I had ever imagined. The burden of representing a cause, of being seen as a symbol of strength and truth, felt heavier with each passing day. And it wasn't just in the media anymore. I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, wondering if people recognized me from the story. Would they see me as the soldier who was mistreated? Or would they judge me based on the way the media had painted the picture? One afternoon, I was walking through a crowded shopping mall when I noticed a group of people whispering behind me. I turned quickly, catching a glimpse of their expressions. They weren't looking at me like a fellow traveler, someone just passing through. They were staring, sizing me up as if they were trying to figure out whether or not I was the guy from the headline. I wanted to keep walking, to ignore them, but a thought stopped me. They didn't know the whole story, and neither did anyone else. I kept walking. But now, with every step, the weight of that recognition felt a little more suffocating. It wasn't just my name being dragged through the media anymore, it was my life. And I had no choice but to face the consequences, both good and bad, of standing up for the truth. But something had changed within me. I had realized that I had control, at least over my own response. Whether people believed the story or not, whether they supported me or judged me, didn't matter as much as what I chose to do with it. I would stand firm, even if it meant carrying this burden for longer than I anticipated. Because, in the end, it wasn't just about proving a point to the world, it was about proving it to myself. As the days passed, the story about the flight incident didn't just fade away into the background noise of the news cycle. It kept coming back, reverberating through every conversation, social media post, and news outlet. But I wasn't the only one whose life had been affected by the media storm. In some strange way, it seemed like everyone was being forced to confront their own biases, their own perceptions of others. One evening, as I sat on my couch, scrolling through the endless comments and updates, I got another message. This time, it wasn't a random critic or another voice of condemnation. It was a message from someone who had once been an advocate for the military, someone who had criticized my actions for being too quick to anger. But the message that evening was different. After reading the updated article and seeing how things developed, I just wanted to say I was wrong. I made assumptions, and I regret it. We all have a part to play in how things go down. You handled that situation better than I would have. Thank you for standing up. I paused, letting the words sink in. This wasn't just some stranger defending me. This was someone who had initially sided with the other narrative. And yet, here they were, acknowledging the complexity of the situation and admitting their own mistake. It wasn't just a message of support, it was a moment of growth for them, and for me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this had never been just about one incident, one flight, or even one man's actions. This had touched on something deeper, something that a lot of people weren't even fully aware of until the story broke open. It was about how we treat each other when we're different, how quickly we jump to conclusions, and how willing we are to accept a narrative that may not be the full truth. The ripple effect of the story had caused a shift, not just in how I saw myself, but in how others saw the world around them. And for once, it felt like the truth was winning. But then came the message I never saw coming. It was late one night when I got a text from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me open it. "I'm the man you spoke to on the plane." My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the message for a moment, unsure of what to do. "I know what I said. I know I hurt you," the text continued. "But I've been reading the stories, seeing the reactions, and I'm ashamed of myself. I didn't mean it the way it came out. I didn't mean to drag you into something like this. But I understand now." My hands shook as I read the words. The man from the flight had reached out, but why? To apologize? To explain himself? I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it, but something inside me told me to at least respond. "You've hurt a lot of people with those words," I typed back. "But it's good to hear that you understand the impact now." There was a long pause before he responded. "I never saw it that way, to be honest. I thought I was just expressing frustration. But I realize now that there's more to the story than I wanted to believe. I've been doing some reflecting. I'm sorry for my part in all of this." I sat there, staring at the screen, processing what he had said. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was genuine. It was a start. For a moment, I felt a weight lift off my chest. Maybe there was hope for understanding, even in the most unexpected places. Maybe this wasn't about me versus him or me versus the world. Maybe it was just about people taking responsibility for their actions and being open enough to learn and change. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope that things could be different. As the days passed after the unexpected text, I started to notice a subtle shift. The anger, the frustration, the bitterness that had surrounded me since that flight, it was starting to melt away. The man's apology, clumsy as it was, had opened a door that I hadn't expected to open. It didn't undo the damage, but it provided a glimpse of the human side of the situation that had been missing for so long. The online discourse slowed down as well. The story, though still circulating, no longer held the same fierce energy it once did. People had started to move on, or at least, they had started to reconsider their views on the incident. The headlines had shifted, no longer focused on just the mockery or the confrontation, but on the broader conversation it sparked. There were op-eds being written about public interactions, about civility, and about the power of empathy. I wasn't sure how I felt about it all anymore. The media, the public backlash, the social media campaigns, it was exhausting. But the quiet messages of support, the people who took the time to tell me that they understood, that they saw what I was trying to do, that kept me going. It reminded me that there was something bigger at play here. Then, one day, the final piece of this whole ordeal fell into place. I had been invited to appear on a popular morning talk show, to speak about the incident. It was an offer I had initially considered turning down. After everything that had happened, the last thing I wanted was more exposure. But then I remembered the one thing that had kept me grounded through it all: I hadn't spoken up for fame or for attention. I had done it because I believed in standing up when something wasn't right. So, I agreed. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and I prepared myself for what was sure to be a difficult conversation. I spent hours rehearsing what I would say, trying to find the right words to express everything that had happened without sounding like I was just retelling the same old story. I wanted to explain what had driven me to speak out, to share my side of the story without letting the emotions from the past weeks cloud the message. When the day of the interview arrived, I was a bundle of nerves. I arrived at the studio early, the reality of what I was about to do setting in. I wasn't sure if I was ready to relive everything, but I knew it was the next step in reclaiming my narrative. The show's host greeted me warmly, and the conversation began. I told my side of the story, starting from the flight and ending with the fallout, the media storm, and the surprising way the public had responded. I made it clear that my goal wasn't to point fingers or place blame, but to open a conversation about how easily misunderstandings could escalate, and how important it was to listen before jumping to conclusions. But it wasn't until the host asked the final question that I realized how far I'd come. Do you think, looking back now, that the whole situation could have been avoided? Do you think there's a way to stop these kinds of misunderstandings before they get out of hand? I took a deep breath, my thoughts slowing as I gathered my response. I think it comes down to this, I said, my voice steady now. We all carry assumptions about each other. We all have biases, whether we know it or not. But the thing is, those assumptions can destroy lives, they can break people down. If we could just stop and listen, really listen, maybe we could find common ground before things spiral. It doesn't mean we'll always agree, but understanding goes a long way. The room was quiet for a moment as the host nodded thoughtfully. I could see it, the shift in the energy of the conversation. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a message, one that I hoped could resonate with others. We don't always have control over what happens to us, but we do have control over how we choose to respond. And in the end, that's what mattered. The interview wrapped up with a final round of applause from the studio audience. As I left the stage, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't felt in weeks. The world hadn't stopped turning, but for the first time since the incident, I felt like I had my feet back on the ground. I may never forget the flight or the chaos that followed, but I realized that sometimes, standing up for what's right isn't about fighting every battle. Sometimes, it's just about setting the stage for a more honest conversation. And that was enough for me. The aftermath of the interview didn't bring as much relief as I'd expected, but it did bring something I hadn't realized I needed: peace. The public's opinion wasn't as much of a focus for me anymore. The opinions of strangers who would never understand the depth of the situation didn't matter like they used to. I had spoken my truth, shared my story, and that was enough. The world would keep turning, and the news cycle would move on, as it always did. But something inside me had shifted. I had taken control of my narrative, and in doing so, I had found a sense of resolution. As the weeks went by, I found myself reflecting on the larger lessons I'd learned throughout this ordeal. The most important lesson wasn't about defending myself against slander or proving my worth, it was about understanding the weight of our words, our assumptions, and how easily they could shape the lives of others. It wasn't just the man on the flight who had made a mistake, it was all of us. We live in a world where we're quick to judge and even quicker to share our judgments. But I realized that we all have a responsibility to pause, to truly listen before we react. Not just for the sake of others, but for our own peace of mind. The apology I received from the man on the flight still weighed heavily on me. It wasn't perfect, but it had been real. He had admitted his mistake, and in doing so, had opened up a dialogue that felt authentic. Sometimes, it takes a hard moment, a confrontation, even, to make us understand the effects of our actions. But even harder still is realizing that we don't always have the chance to make things right. Not everyone gets the opportunity to correct their mistakes. I had been fortunate. By the time the news cycle had fully moved on, I had made peace with the situation. I didn't need to keep fighting battles that had already been won. The apology, the corrected story, the public conversation, all of it had played its part. Now, it was time to move forward. And so, I did. I took a step back from the noise, from the spotlight, and refocused on what mattered most, my life, my peace of mind, and the people who stood by me throughout the storm. I spent more time with my loved ones, finding joy in the small things that had once seemed mundane. I reconnected with friends, with colleagues, with myself. The world had its opinions, but I was no longer chasing approval. I was focused on something deeper, growing as a person, learning from the past, and moving forward with a clearer perspective. The story of the flight incident wasn't just a chapter in my life, it was a turning point. And while I couldn't change the past, I could shape my future. What had started as an uncomfortable moment in the sky had transformed into something bigger, something that reminded me of the power of standing up for what's right, the importance of self-awareness, and the value of personal growth. That, in the end, was the greatest lesson I could take away from the whole experience.